Welcome to the CAS YouTube channel. I'm Michael Wynn, and today I have the pleasure to interview re-recording mixer Jo DeAngelis, who is the recipient of 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, one of which I believe was for Watchmen, which was an incredible work. And also, most recently, what we're here to talk about today is his work on the TV crime drama HBO's Mare of Easttown, which he was a recipient for the 58 CAS Outstanding Achievement in Sound Mixing in a limited TV series category. So, Joe, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Joe, one of the purposes of the CAS YouTube channel is really just to, outreach to, not only our membership who are curious about your process and what it is that you do, but also film students, the film industry, and general public. How did you get into sound and become a re-recording mixer and get to work on shows, such as Mare of Easttown?
It's been a pretty long road with some ups and downs. I started in the music business after I graduated from LA Recording Workshop, which I believe is now LA Film School out here. But when I went, it was a small little facility off Ventura Boulevard out here, and it was like a 600-hour course, and I took that, and I graduated, and all of my peers were off, getting runner jobs at music studios and working at places like Ocean Way and things like that. I got my foot in the door at a studio in Hollywood and worked there for a little while, and just kind of figured out that the music business probably wasn't going to be the direction that I would be going in. I had a family friend named Rick Klein who was a re-recording mixer for many years, did all, big films. I think he's got 11 Oscar nominations. I've known him since I was a young kid. He was a drummer in a band with my uncle. So I would see him all the time, and I would always ask him questions. I was always interested, and finally I got a chance to go hang out at Universal when he was on the Hitchcock studio with Chris Carpenter, who I'm mixing with now. And I was hooked the minute I sat there and watched them hit play and the lights went down and the screen went up and the sound came on, and I said, that's where I want to go. So I got my foot in the door at Universal working in the vault. At the time we had MMR and MMP recorders in post, and they required drives that were in sleds, and it was my job to manage all those drives at Universal. And we had maybe 500 or 600 of these 4 gig, 9 gig drives at the time, which is kind of silly considering how big drives are and small they are. You can get terabytes on little drives now, but that was my job, and I managed all the hard drives and kind of worked my way up. I worked as a loader, I worked as a recordist, I worked in restoration and Sonic Solutions at the time, restoring films. And then went into digital mastering, where I would do laybacks for clients, and that's where we started doing foreign mixes. And that's kind of where I learned. I would listen to the movies and then try to emulate the same dialogue treatments that those guys were using on the foreign dubs, and did that for 8 years. And then I got a shot to go work on House. And that's in 2010 when I started mixing. I did a one-man mix on that show in their production office. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. And thankfully, House was a big show at the time, so it was kind of a legit credit. And I just kind of went from there. When House ended, just kind of kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And here I am.
You had mentioned when you first got the opportunity to sit in a, I guess it was a dub stage.
Yeah,
is that right?
Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah,
on the Alfred Hitchcock film. That's when you first met Chris Carpenter. Now, Chris Carpenter was also the other re-recording mixer on Mare of Easttown, right?
Yeah, it's a funny story because Rick was working with Chris at the time, and they were in the Hitchcock theater, and then. I became a recordist on Dub 3 with Andy Koyama, and Bill Meadows was the recordist. I was the loader. And Chris came over and worked with Andy. And we were together. Andy and Chris were together for many years, I think like 8 years. I was with them for about a year and a half before I went off to work in the restoration department. And one day, my effects mixer, Ken Cobett, who I was working with, he was going to go team up with someone else. And so I saw Chris at Technicolor where we were working. I hadn't seen him for a long time. And I just asked him, I said, hey, I need an effects mixer to fill in for me. Are you interested? And he said, sure, I'll fill in. And that was almost 5 years ago. So I guess he likes the gig. He stayed.
That is really cool. It's amazing to me, like how in the business, especially working in sound, how the relationships that you work with are like really some of the most valuable things that you have in your career. And so for those of us who, even like myself, who are still learning the all of the different categories of mixers and posts, like on set, there's the production sound mixer, which is like myself, and I'll usually have a team of boom, sometimes 2 utilities if we're lucky. But then we get into the post side. Now, I know it's going to the editors and the assistant editors for assembly and then editing.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does it hand off to you? And especially with Mare of Easttown in mind, at what point did it hand off to your team, and how does that work? So how many re-recording mixers are involved? How many mixers and post are involved in that project? And what are the timelines like per episode?
Well, for Mare of Easttown, I think we mixed anywhere from 5 to 8 days per episode, depending on episode. Usually the first one we get an extra day because it's, establishing sounds of the town and things like that. As far as mixers go, I mix dialogue and music, and my partner Chris mixes the backgrounds, the hard effects, and the Foley. But we also have ADR mixers who record and mix the ADR. We have Foley mixers who record and mix the Foley. We have editors who cut all the sound together, the dialogue together with the ADR and the group, which is, your basic, if you were in a restaurant, your basic talkie track in the background.
Your loop groups, right?
Loop groups, yeah. And then we have Walla, which would be like a bigger bed of voices and things. That's on the effects side. So Chris would handle that kind of stuff. It usually, I think they get 10 to 15 days, I think they were getting to prep the show before it came to us. I'd have to ask Brad. I'm not positive about that. Usually the bigger shows, obviously, they get more time for editorial.
So the effects re-recording mixers and then the Foley mixers are getting like this 10 to 15 day window with, I'm assuming, is a picture locked cut?
Well,
or are they working in reels of?
In a perfect world, it's locked, but there's always changes nowadays. No, we work on one long play picture. Now, Foley, when they record the Foley, they don't get that. They only get like a day or two to do something like that. And ADR
per episode?
Yeah, per episode. And then ADR, whatever, depending on how much ADR there is. And nowadays, ADR is all over the world. I mean, actors are all over the place. So we can have people in New York, we can have people in Atlanta, we can have people in LA, just depending where the cast is, or England. So after they're done shooting, everyone kind of scatters, and then it's up to the post people to find where all these guys are and schedule their ADRs. So, some characters might not have any, some might have a lot. It just depends on, how what happened with you guys on set and how much they want to add. There's always add to help tell the story. So they'll just do, 4-hour sessions here and there, maybe a day's worth of ADR per episode.
So the show, based on my research, the production was filmed in Philadelphia in 2019.
Yeah.
Then the shutdown, then they resumed filming. So on the effects mixer side, which I know is Chris's side, are they going out and capturing ambience or recordings for these kinds of locations to go into the mix, or what is that process like? Or is it library sounds combined with that, or talk about your process with that?
It is a little of
Mare of
both.
Easttown.
It's a little of both. There's library stuff. I mean, we have a huge library our editors work from. We can have stuff, maybe if we hear stuff in production that we like. That's usually Brad Brad will do a sound spotting with the director and the showrunners, and they'll kind of discuss, how it should sound. Like Brad Inglesby, who was the writer of the show, he grew up there, so he was very specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, trains, we need trains and traffic and planes and, that kind of stuff. And,
So Brad, the sound supervisor, is then relaying that information.
Correct. To us.
To Chris and yourself, obviously to the team, and saying, hey, based on these spotting sessions, these are the type of sounds that we're looking for, and then begins your process. And can a lot of that start to happen before you see the rough cuts, or is that after you're seeing picture that assembly is happening on your end?
He'll be ahead of it. Usually, ideally, they like to lock picture, and then they'll do the sound spot, and then the editorial team will do their job, and then they'll hand it over to us.
Yeah.
Sometimes he'll spot to unlock picture if schedules are starting to get tight. And once he gets that sound spot in, it's kind of the roadmap. And we also have the temp. The picture editor does a temp mix, so that's kind of like a rough sketch as well. It's like he might put specific sounds in, and when they're spotting it, he'll say, hey, this area of the city has trains, so make sure that we play trains here. Or this area has bus traffic, or it's quiet in this neighborhood because there's not as much. So when they do the sound spotting, that's Brad's writing this down, and then he sends his notes to us. So when we sit down and start working, we kind of have a roadmap of how things should be, and what's important and what's not important, and then that boils down to what we have to do. It's like, what's important in this scene? What are we focusing on? Is it a musical moment, or is an ambience more important? Is there source music in here? Is does this bar play this type of music, or what is, it's just all about developing that environment to make it real. So you don't notice it. I mean, when sound is really good, you shouldn't notice it. It should feel like part of the picture, So making it as real, for Mare, it was all real. It was all, here's where we are, we're in this city. Whereas in Watchmen, I mean, that was a completely different show, so I treat it like it's music. Some music, if you mix music, you understand you don't mix jazz the same way you mix rock. You don't mix classical the same way you mix jazz. So it's kind of like the shows that we do. They run the gamut from like Watchmen to something that's grounded in reality like Mare of Easttown, to Bosch, which is city. Again, L.A. plays a huge part of that show.
So you had mentioned, just so we're breaking it down, and thank you for explaining this process too, Joe, so well, because it's really helping, I think, me understand, and also our viewers understand the process of how sound actually gets from editorial to you. So you had mentioned the sound supervisor, Brad North, is first and foremost, once a picture lock cut ideally is happening, is meeting with the showrunner and also the director, and making this list of sorts of what you said is a spotting session,
and the picture
and
editor.
Then from
sorry,
and the picture editor.
I don't want to leave them out.
So and Amy Duddleson, right?
Yeah, Amy did a lot. Yeah, she's great.
Okay, yeah. And so then goes the process of coming to your team, yourself and Chris, as far as making all that a reality. But there's also a Foley mixer involved, correct?
Yeah.
Now, did Chris do the Foley, or who was the Foley mixer?
He does the Foley. The Foley mixer is the person that mixes the Foley while they're recording it. So when they're actually walking the feet and doing the props, stuff like cups, they record, and that's the mixer is mixing that. And then those tracks come to Chris, and he mixes the Foley into the show. So you can consider, the Foley mixer is kind of like what you do. You're like a production mixer, except they're just recording Foley. And the ADR mixer is kind of like what you do, but he's just recording the voiceover stuff, the replacements, and the loop group. He's recording that as well. So they do that, and then they hand it to us, and we're the only two mixers on the stage. I handle all the dialogue and music, and Chris handles all the backgrounds and the Foley and that stuff. So, it's all feeds to us. It's like a funnel. So we have hundreds of sounds that we basically funnel down into a 6-track or Atmos mix, however many channels our print master is going to be. So, yeah, everything just kind of comes to us, and we funnel it down to the final product, and that's what you hear, what's married to picture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. How is it that your team, yourself and Chris, are communicating creative ideas? What's that flow like typically in the mix process with the directors and editors and getting from the start to a completed project?
Yeah, we usually won't interface with those guys until we've had a mix that we're ready to present to them. So a typical mix on Mare of Easttown would be me working on the dialogue probably for a couple days, Chris pre-dubbing all the effects for a couple days, and then we join together and put the show together maybe for a day or two with Brad, our sound supervisor. He's watching, and he'll be like, okay, we need to make sure, basically we're hitting all the spotting notes, everything's playing well. And then we'll bring in Craig and Brad. We would play it for them, and we would get notes. Amy would give notes, and Craig and Brad, and we would execute those notes, and then we would do another playback. And once everyone was happy, it went to the studio, to HBO, and then they would watch it, and then maybe they would have a couple notes like, oh, can we clear this line up? We couldn't understand what he said. Or, by that point, usually the mix is really working after we've done that many playbacks and notes. It's in pretty good shape.
So you're getting the picture locked edit, and you guys, is all of those notes and revisions part of that 5 to 8 day process you were talking about per episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine that 2 of those days are probably playback and notes.
Yeah.
Which even compresses that time even shorter, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So when you look at it that way, it's funny. They're like, oh, it's a 5-day mix, but no, really it's 3 days or 4 days, because you got to allow that time. Usually a day for playback and notes is pretty good.
And let's talk about deliverables for a second, Joe.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that, this is a HBO streaming, correct?
Yeah.
And the deliverable was Atmos mixes, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so are you also doing 5.1 mixes?
Yeah.
What if someone's in stereo, like at home? How does all that work?
So, we mixed, Mare and Atmos. We mixed Watchmen and Atmos too. I think that Watchmen was their first true Atmos. I know Game of Thrones.
Interesting.
Game of Thrones was Atmos, but I think that was all upmixed. I think that originally started as a 5.1 mix, and then they upmixed. But we started Watchmen and Mare of Easttown in native Atmos, meaning there was no upmixing of any sort. It was all panned out and played in the Atmos format. So when you're mixing in Atmos, the beds, what we call the bed tracks, are 7/1. So you have your left, center, right, left side, right rear, left side. And then you have, in home Atmos, you have 4 speakers in the ceiling. So those are the tops. We call them the tops. So you'll have 2 tops in the front and 2 tops in the back. In theatrical Atmos, you can have 100 speakers in the ceiling. So it's a little different.
Yeah.
Home we call it baby.
Sure.
We call it baby Atmos because it's just the 4 in the ceiling, which, in reality, at someone's house, they're not going to have 100 speakers hanging in their ceiling. Most people don't even have 4.
They say the minimum is 7. Is it called 7.1.2?
Correct.
Is that right?
712.
Okay, and then it's the 7.1 you talked about, the left, center, right, and then the
2 in
the side, left, side, right, and the 2 rears.
Yeah.
And then you said you have your 2
in the ceiling.
2 in the ceiling would be the minimum.
Would be the minimum, yeah. On the dub stage, we have 4. When it goes to the home, it pairs down into 2. Most receivers are 2 in the ceiling. There are some receivers that'll do 4 in the ceiling. But I think most people listen to it on sound bars, those new Atmos sound bars, like Sonos has one out.
It seems like technology seems to be moving towards the right direction a lot for the home listening experience is getting better and better, especially like with wireless speakers and the affordability of these Atmos setups
Yeah.
and the technology that allows, these Atmos, mixes to be streamed and delivered and in someone's listening environment has got to be a game changer for you guys,
Yeah.
thinking that, wow, listeners are really going to be able to experience this. This isn't like we're just doing it and then everyone listens in stereo.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it still is. I think stereo is. Netflix just put out a thing about how they did a study on who's listening on what. Most people, I think, are still watching on TV. I think that's still number one.
Yeah.
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 But sound bars are a close second, I think. And then headphones and phones and TVs and.
Of this, I think one of these important things that in the sound community is bridging this gap between production sound mixers and re-recording mixers. And a lot of the times, the re-recording mixers, you guys aren't even coming on board until we've filmed episode 7.
Yeah.
So the best thing we got in post is the post supervisor, usually and post producer, who usually I'm in contact with. And then you have the editors who are on receiving the dialogue.
And their assistants.
And their assistant editors and stuff like that. So, so the question for you is what is it that you would like to see more from production sound mixers? Now, obviously, I can tell. Let's give Richard Bullock some props and some credit for his work.
Yeah,
because you can tell the dialogue was phenomenal from Richard and his team. And, like if there was one thing you could say, I would really love to see more of this or more of that. And that's just my own selfish, I think, asking for me. Like what's...
It's interesting now because like when I first started mixing on house, it was all on set. Mm-hmm. And we would have 1 and 2 boom. And I mean, as well as I do, a boom just it's beautiful. It really gets, I mean, that's where you get the really good dialogue. That's where you get the nice low end and just the warmth and the, I mean, if it would be a dream if everything was boom all the time. But now with the reality of things, especially like a Mare of Easttown, where they're shooting on location all the time and wide and tights, where you have two, you can't get a boom guy in there. You're relying on lavs and on the lavs, and every time I talk to production mixers, it's like, man, make sure the lav isn't in a shoe or buried under clothes where it's not usable, because a lot of the time we have to go to that. Thankfully now with the new software that came out, what is it, Vocal Align, where you can time align the boom and the lav mics, we're able to use a little bit of that. So maybe now that the boom is off mic, you still get the ambience of the room like we were talking about earlier on my internal microphone. You still get the feel of the space, but you can kind of blend that lav, you can blend the lav in with it, so you get the clarity as well. So for me, the lav is super important nowadays because and I know during COVID it was really difficult for him because the actors were placing the mics themselves because he couldn't get close. They weren't allowed to get close to him. So not only do you have someone who's inexperienced, but maybe just doesn't really care, I mean, you sometimes you get that lav mic and it's like, where is this thing? It sounds like it's in their shoe. There's just, and you're like, well, that's useless. I can't really use that. So for me, I mean, and I know what you guys, a good friend of mine is a production mixer, and I've been on set with him. I know what you guys are up against. It's not, and I've seen firsthand. I mean, when I was on set with him, we were working on a show, and they were building, I think it was a Starbucks right next to where we were at LA City College. And, there's construction, there's saws and hammers and, and I know what you guys are up against, and it's not always pretty. I know what Richard was up against. I mean, some of those scenes under the bridge with the traffic and stuff. And thankfully the lavs were good. So I actually was able to use them in a little bit of ADR, and, you kind of just, it's like you say, you don't want anything to jump out. You want it to all sound smooth. So, Chris had the good backgrounds to push up against it. And I was able to isotope enough to get it clean, and then a little ADR, and you just kind of just make it work and not be noticed, which is the key. So, I mean, and communication is, I've had post mixers, I mean, production mixers reach out to me, hey, FYI, episode 3, we were here and it's going to be really bad, or we shot next to the electricity place and there was all kinds of interference, and the battle's fought. You guys do the best you can. I understand directors don't want to hear you guys saying, all right, this is no good. You got to, it's such a tightrope that you guys have to walk between, making too much noise and not making enough noise to make sure that the audio is captured, because you turn the sound off and all of a sudden your movie's not so good. And if I have dialogue that I can't play, if the dialogue can't play, nothing else can play. Because if you're struggling to hear what's being said, you can't play the backgrounds, you can't play the hard effects, you can't play everything around it, So that's the anchor is the dialogue, and being able to get a good track. And like you said, to keep the noise floor as low as possible, and the dialogue, you want to hear it lift and just separate a little bit from that, and then, let effects fill in the rest. So lav mics to me, I think, are the most important. I mean, as right now, if you're on set and you can do boom, that's always a plus, because whenever I get a chance, I'll go to boom.
Yeah. Talk to me about, especially in Mare of Easttown, one of the things that I notice is that in your mix that there is an excellent use of perspectives. To me, that is just a must-have part of a filmmaker's repertoire, in a sense. As a mixer, one of the things I noticed is that every time I was in a space, I felt like I was in the space. Is there something that is done for you in the mix that really, because you had talked about the importance of lavs, obviously, and especially with shooting wide and tight. How is it that you work with a sense of space in a mix?
Indoors, I mean, I would use reverb, indoor. It's a reverb that I use commonly to match angles. Like you said, maybe we'll be on a boom shot that goes to a lav, and I'll have a mono reverb just to match that production, So if we are going from a boom and then we go to someone who's on a lav, I'll find a verb that sounds very almost the same and try to use that to blend across. And then when we're working in multi-channel environments, if it's a bigger room, I'll put an Atmos verb or a 7.1 verb or a 5.1, depending on what we're working on. I'll put them in that space. So that you hear, if they're in a living room, I might put a multi-channel verb on the voice, but then I'll use a mono verb to kind of blend between lav and boom and off mic and on mic type of stuff. So that, because that's where the verb, that's where the dialogue is. It's in the center channel. So if you just used a multi-channel verb, it would sound disconnected. You need something across the center channel to make those seem, seamless.
Well, congratulations to you, Joe, for your award, and we appreciate your time.
Anytime.
And to close with, I mean, you had some excellent, really, I felt like input. Let's take one brief moment, just the last question, and think about students maybe who are student members of CAS, or maybe people who are starting from nothing who would love to one day work in film as a re-recording mixer or production sound mixer or effects mixer. Is there any kind of advice you can give someone who maybe is just starting out, as far as based on your experience, that would be great for them to know trying to get into this business working in sound?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, obviously watch all the TV and movies you can. Find out the people who are doing the work that you're enjoying. Do anything you can as far as, I did so many short films and things like that when I first started mixing. Before I started mixing house, I was always looking for projects. I was always looking, to get on and work on a stage or just learn equipment and how things work and just explore those. Because, I have people that come up to me and say, oh, I want to be a mixer. And then they find out that they like cutting effects more, So there's all these different avenues you can go down. You can be a production mixer. You can be a Foley mixer. You can be an ADR mixer. You can be a re-recording mixer. You can be an editor, a dialogue editor. There's a Foley walker if you're in, if you want to perform Foley. There's all these different avenues. I say explore it all. Don't just think, this is where it's at, this is what I'm going to do. Maybe that is, maybe you will end up doing that if that's truly your goal. But, there's a lot in the sound business that you can explore. There's a lot in the sound field. Reach out to people if you have the connections through CAS or, anywhere. Use them to your advantage.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Joe. And thank you for taking the time to share your expertise and passion with us.
Thank you.
And for those of you watching, be sure to subscribe to the CAS channel for more videos just like this. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone really soon.
Thank you.